You're listening to Investigation Insiders by Integris Intelligence.
Hello again, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Investigation Insiders. This is Forhad. Hope you are all doing well. We've got another real treat for you today. I'm joined by a very, very special lady, Christine Ippolito, founder and principal of Compass Workforce Solutions. We were actually introduced several years ago by a mutual friend, Mario Doyle. Very grateful to him for the introduction because Christine and Compass have been a great partner ever since. Welcome, Christine. How are you?
I'm great, Forhad. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So perhaps we can start with an introduction of yourself and your firm, Compass Workforce Solutions.
Certainly. Thank you. So my informal response, when I'm out in social settings, obviously pre-COVID, what do I do or what is my line of work? My tagline is I make a living off of people behaving badly at work. And this generally piques interest and leads to a much better conversation than if I just say I'm a human resource professional. But really, what Compass does is we work with small and mid-sized companies, and we provide the type of support that allows companies to grow, to scale, to be sold at a higher valuation. And we focus on helping companies understand their compliance obligations, their operational controls as it relates to people. So how do we make good hiring decisions? How do we manage performance? What are the steps in the process? What are the procedures? When and how do people get feedback? Having good documentation like job descriptions, employee manuals. Obviously, during COVID, we've done a lot with safety procedures, safety protocols, the daily health affirmations. We deal a lot with conflict resolution, and we also provide employee and organizational assessment using the predictive index.
Sure.
So that's a little bit about me and my team.
So what about you? Tell us. So that's, again, Compass, obviously, we think very, very highly of the organization. I think the knowledge, the team, the assistance that you offer is fantastic. But what about you yourself as well? Tell us a little bit about like your own career and kind of the different things you were involved with before starting Compass.
Sure. So my background is a lot of operations. I actually started out in retail. So my undergraduate degree is business and retail management, and I went to the University of Wisconsin on their Stout campus. And I spent the first probably 15 years of my career working for large retail organizations like Gap, Levi Strauss, Cost Plus World Market. So really gaining an understanding of the customer, how employees impact the success or the failure of the business based on training, skill, interaction with clients, and also merchandising, right? Marketing and how you position your product or your service and how you attract people.
Sure. Sure.
And
So we've never I don't think we've had this discussion before specifically related to transitioning to Compass, but why'd you decide to go into business for yourself, by the way?
I decided to go into business by myself because it was in the back of my mind, it was always something I wanted to do. And the further I got in my career, my last professional, employee role was I was the head of HR at a Fortune 250. And I oversaw over 1,000 employees. And in that organization, I really didn't feel like I was as effective as I could have been in just I was part of the machine and really spending most of my time dealing with problem employees versus having the opportunity to grow and develop people. And my passion in human resources really came out when I was working in startup type companies or companies funded by venture capital. So, you know, New York and New Jersey and New York City presents a really interesting opportunity to work with a lot of small businesses that are family owned or startup companies or funded by venture capital or, you know, taken over by private equity. And that's where I can really move the needle and my team can make a big difference because we're no longer just kind of maintaining, and how you hire and how you develop the people in that organization makes a huge difference in the success of that organization. And you have a lot more flexibility in smaller organizations. You can respond faster. And I also think it's 85% of the jobs in our economy, and it's a group that is really not served well by larger companies like ADP and Paychex. And there was a great gap in the marketplace. So it's sort of my passions aligned with a need. And I formed Compass in 2009 during one of our country's larger recessions or depressions or whatever the appropriate classification was.
Yeah, sure.
And it was at a time when there was a lot of regulation coming out under the Affordable Care Act, a lot of regulation coming out from Governor Patterson in New York State. So it was good timing all around. And now this October will be 12 years. So time flies when you're having fun.
That's incredible. I mean, congratulations. I mean, you know, again, Tony and I know from following a similar path that being in business for yourself for 12 years, there's a lot of, you know, highs, but there's lows as well. And if you could just kind of persevere through it, like you have, you know, there's better pastures ahead. So congratulations on that. How was the last year for you? What was the pandemic and the period? How did all that go for you?
So on a personal note, I'm someone that is an endurance athlete. Like I enjoy, I've done 12-hour events, 30-hour events. My approach to COVID after we realized, you know, we were initially going to be on lockdown for I think 2 weeks, and then it was a month, and then I said, okay, this is an event of unknown duration, and I really need to start to pace myself because I'm going to apply the same thought process of rest, nutrition, hydration, mental breaks, and you know, vitamin supplementation to try to be as best as I can be throughout this. And it was a very interesting time because our clients clung to us, and it was extremely stressful, although rewarding when you could help people by implementing a program like Workshare and aligning it with their PPP. But you know, it extremely stressful and rewarding. I think, you know, you mentioned there's a lot of highs and lows in being in a business, and it certainly is always the roller coaster ride of a lifetime.
Sure.
And that's really what COVID felt like. I mean, the week of March 17th, I had 4 clients that were in food service call and say, we've just been shut down. We're not sure what's going to happen. We love you. Can you help us? But I don't know when we're going to be able to pay you.
Yep.
We had other clients that, you know, about 30 to 45 days in, that we had worked with in the past and had grown over 100 employees, calling us and saying, we just laid off our HR person that you helped us hire. We still have 45 people. We need your help. You know, we don't know how much or when. You know, can we come back? Can we work with you? So every day was like that. Just didn't know what was going to happen. And at the same time, for clients where they were used to seeing us on site once a week, or twice a week. Now, as a business owner, I'm thinking, how do I deliver more value and help them and not have people calling me saying, I need a discount because you and your people aren't here?
Right, right, right.
So we did things like we did 1 Minute Manager book clubs. We added, we partnered with you and we did webinars to bring critical information about safety at work, returning to work. How do we view this? So it was, I have to say, it was probably the mental challenge of a lifetime.
Yeah, yeah,
And it's great. I think the CDC announced this morning that they're considering, no masks indoors, although New York State is still deciding if they're going to follow that. But it feels like life is coming back. And I know just from what's going on in May with us and people reaching out for help, it certainly seems like most people are confident that they will be back in business, although in a very different way than they were before, but definitely back and able to hang in there. So I feel very fortunate about that.
Well, I'll tell you, Christine, again, to our audience, like I said, Christine's an impressive lady. One of my favorite attributes about her is that she tells it like it is. And I got to tell you, the sort of in asking you about how the last year has been, for your answer to start at that personal level about your health, about your nutrition, about all those kind of things, is really just incredible insight. I got to tell you, because really you can't be of value to the people that work with you, to your clients, to everyone else, unless you're okay, right? And so I just think that's just brilliant insight. And certainly we learned a lot from you. So thank you for kind of, again, there was a lot of back and forth. We did a lot of work together, putting information out. So it was definitely a good process for us, and we learned a lot from you. So um, just a very, very interesting insight. And thanks for sharing that information. So I guess to hop into the show, what we're talking about today is uh, basically people doing things at work that either get themselves, their company, their coworkers into a situation that's not necessarily positive. So, as you know, Christine, our show is called Investigation Insiders, right? Part of what we try to do is peel back the layers on different issues that impact human resources, investigation, security. And, I thought it'd be interesting to talk about an experience or some of your experiences related to questionable behavior by employees, which usually leads to a few things, right? HR and security at a minimum. I'm saying those two things because it's kind of our roles, right? Involvement in conducting an investigation and determining what happened and who was involved and all those kind of things, right? So maybe we could start with like a memorable story that you have, obviously without revealing who it was or the players involved, to kind of get the discussion rolling.
Sure. I mean, honestly, Forhad, there's so many stories.
Yeah, I have a few
And
too.
so one of the things that just absolutely fascinates me is the lack of due diligence that some companies want to invest in the selection process about who they're bringing into the organization. And that includes kind of what both of us do, right? How do we select people? Behavior-based interviewing, employee assessment, and background checks.
Right, right.
A
Yeah,
lot of the things that I'm going to share could have been prevented or nipped in the bud when people have these processes in place. So actually this week, there was a recent incident that had a positive ending.
sure.
So
Tell us about it.
sure. We have a client that does quite a bit of hiring, and they're, you know, they're an essential company, and so throughout the pandemic we've been moving forward and adding people to the team. So one of the employees said, hey, you know, my brother just moved from another state, now he's in New York. And so the assumption that leadership kind of made is this must be a good person, right? So we didn't implement all the steps in interviewing that maybe should have been there. But we did do a couple things, and there's certain required trainings to be on their work sites, and also there's mandatory drug testing. Now, we don't test for marijuana at this client, and we're very open about that. There's no need to. We're really testing for opioids and heavy duty drugs.
Yep.
We send the drug test out via electronic means, and this prospective candidate has an issue with it. So he comes back in, we give him a paper form. 2 days later, we get a call from the lab saying there's a problem. This person has extremely hot urine. This is new for me. I'm like, okay, shouldn't it be about 98 degrees? Like, and the woman at the lab was very clear. It's above human temperature. You know, he was in the room giving a sample for about 2.5 minutes. We followed our protocols. We transferred it to another cup. It's still too warm. We gave this person the option to drink water, sit here for up to 3 hours and give a second sample. And that person became very agitated and left.
Huh.
She said, but I have to notify you because there's a chain of custody form. He came and we were not able to successfully complete the test. So I said, thank you very much. Okay. So that candidate showed up again at the employer location and said, I had a problem with my drug test. I need to take another test.
Oh.
So we thought, all right, you know, let's not cause a scene on location. Let's give this person the opportunity and buy ourselves some time to debrief on this and see what we think needs to be done. So in coordination with the other folks, we also learned that this person had not completed their safety certification in the last 7 days. So we decided this is a good point to rescind the offer. An offer was extended over a week ago. This person was supposed to start several days ago. The start date has been delayed because we can't complete the steps in the process. And we're just going to advise the candidate that there's been a delay. They haven't been able to start on time. We don't know when they're going to be able to start. So we're rescinding the offer of employment. So that particular incident, when you have those checks and balances in place, you can keep problems from happening. So we rescinded the offer to that person, and they have not caused any type of issue since. Now, as well as you, we get involved in a lot of workplace investigations around sexual misconduct or discrimination at work.
Sure.
And we get hired oftentimes by law firms to independently investigate a situation or a complaint at one of their clients. So probably one of the most egregious investigations that we've done, which I think can be just attributed to sheer lack of judgment and just too much ego, was an owner in attempting to have a bonding moment or to build a relationship with a relatively new salesperson that had joined the team, and they were both men, both males, decided that he was going to share the pictures on his phone of a recent trip to Amsterdam between himself and a prostitute that he was with in Amsterdam. Now, as you or your listeners may be familiar, prostitution is legal in Amsterdam.
Right.
So when this particular salesperson saw the pictures, at the time didn't, respond in an unusual way, but as they stayed on with the company and weren't meeting their sales goals, now the owner comes back and says, hey, we've got a problem. You're not meeting your sales targets. So this salesperson said, well, I've been sexually harassed and you've created a hostile work environment for me, and I can't do my best work.
Wow, that's
And
interesting.
went into the whole situation of what had happened, of course, filed a complaint. Then we get called in to do an investigation. And, you know, the photos that had been shared were so vivid, I guess is a good word, that one of my employees at the time said, I've seen one or two. I'm not really comfortable reviewing all 32. Will you do this for me? I said, of course. You know, you're an owner, I'm an owner. Sometimes we're the ones that kind of have to get into the weeds, so to speak, depending on the nature of what's happening.
Yeah.
And I'm relatively desensitized because I've been doing this for 30 years. So nothing is overly shocking to me, but I'd really never seen pictures quite like this. And then of course we had to document them and include them in the report. And at the end of the day, that lack of judgment ended up costing not only several $1,000s to conduct an investigation, but cost that, you know, a separation agreement, a severance benefit. It just, you wonder these lapses in judgment that people have at work in not maintaining kind of a professional ethical demeanor and thinking that they're going to relate to people in sort of these crude ways. It still kind of surprises me.
I mean, that's pretty wild. And this is at the very highest level of the organization, right? I mean, it's the owner.
Correct. So you can imagine, right, as an HR person, you sort of think to yourself, if this is going on at the top, what's going on at all levels? And how do the people that are there feel? What kind of a culture is this? And how could you possibly have a truly positive and productive work environment when this is the tone coming from leadership?
Wow, that's really great. So you said you guys were working for the law firm. I guess was that the law firm working on behalf of the client itself, meaning the company itself, and asked to conduct the independent investigation?
Right. So they're the law firm that was like providing them with labor advice,
Sure.
had us, you know, contacted us and said, we need you to conduct this investigation,
Right.
because if the law firm conducts the investigation, they become witnesses, they
Sure.
can't defend their clients.
Right.
So a lot of times when there's anticipated to be
Sure.
significant problems,
Yep.
we get called in to do an independent investigation.
Sure, sure. Well, that's really, really interesting. So what was the consequence? What was the end? Was it just financial and sort of reputational damage, or what ended up happening with the players involved?
Well, I mean, certainly you can imagine how disruptive it is if we're coming in and not only speaking to the owner and
Right.
the salesperson, but then having to speak to other people in the office, you know, that the salesperson said, well, should have been aware that this was going on or may have been aware that this had happened.
Right.
So now you're having to ask other direct reports, you know, have you ever been shown pictures at work that make you uncomfortable? Well, no matter how general and you
Yep.
try to make that question, now people know that there's certainly something going on here that's inappropriate. I mean, we had another incident this week where someone reached out to us who was referred to us because they needed HR. And oftentimes, the number two reason that people reach out to us is there's been some type of work related incident.
Mm.
This particular incident was at a smaller company where, again, one of the leaders of the organization smacked a subordinate on her behind as a way to sort of show, I guess, acknowledgement, affection, what have you. And she wasn't actually the one that was upset. She's worked there for a long time. They have a long-standing relationship. knows this person inside and outside of the office and kind of took it in a lighthearted way. But the other employees that saw this behavior were the ones that were extremely upset by it.
Sure.
So, again, leaders set the tone in an organization, and oftentimes what's challenging in smaller companies is the tenor that comes from the top down. And what are the ethics? What are the expectations? What are the requirements to be part of the team? And then how do we attract and retain good people that
Sure.
align with those?
Yeah, no, I mean, again, it's just really interesting. Both of those scenarios are really interesting. Again, it starts at a high level and I guess works its way through the organization. So tell me about like, so in that scenario, right? Like what you just described, what happens next? You guys go in there, you assess the situation and tell me what happens next. What do you guys do, or what does the organization do, and how do they move on or address it? Is it training? Is it you know um, further investigation? How does it work?
Well, I mean, every situation is unique.
Yeah,
And in some cases, when we do an investigation, we may make recommendations, but again, because we're independent, we're
yeah,
not the ones to follow up and do the execution. That would be a little,
sure.
there'd be a conflict of interest with
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
But with a new client, or so one, it's really introducing us as a resource to the employees to have another channel or way of communicating and getting problems and issues resolved or concerns addressed. Obviously, training is a big part of it, and messaging from leadership that sometimes as a leader, you have to admit that maybe you didn't use your best judgment, or something that you did was not really representative of how the firm or the company should be. And I think people recognize, especially after COVID, that we're all human. And
sure.
sometimes we have lapses and we're not 100% cognizant of place, time, and cause and effect.
Yeah, yep,
So generally, acknowledging, this happened, it wasn't me on my best day, that's not how we want people to behave. Having kind of an acknowledgement about that, and then moving on and putting things in place that allow the organization to move forward in a positive way.
hmm,
And I think it also shows the employees that this there's an opportunity, to fix things that haven't ended maybe as intended.
yep, yep. No, absolutely. So I guess those are some of the issues. This it's interesting because we didn't talk about the potential, scenario. We didn't really plan this discussion, and it's taken an interesting turn because the two stories you told are pretty high in terms of the leadership of these two organizations that you described. Obviously, there's also problems that arise with employees that are not necessarily ownership or senior leadership as well, that are similar in nature, right? That I'm sure you have plenty of stories. I do as well. Um, and so I guess that, one of the things that I think would be important to discuss here is, and you've already alluded to some of these things, right? How can employers, how do they protect themselves from not only this type of behavior, right, but other potential violence, theft, other things that could happen at work that you wouldn't want to as a business owner or an employee or anyone involved with the organization. What are some of the things that people should be thinking about?
Well, I mean, I think having a rigorous selection process and having background checks. So, I mean, certainly in New York and in many states, a criminal conviction is not a bar to employment.
Mhm.
And I think it is beneficial for both the employee and the employer to have a sense of what that is, so it can be handled and dealt with when that person arrives.
Sure.
Because there's no such thing as secrets at work, right?
Right.
So if someone does have a conviction and they're a new employee and the employer isn't aware of it, oftentimes what happens is it comes out as part of the rumor mill or the gossip, or, I mean, people Google their new colleagues and they
Absolutely.
look them up online before they show up on day one. It's either curiosity, or they want to see if they have a Facebook page, or do they know anybody that knows this person. Like, Long Island and New York and New Jersey is sort of like you're 1 degree separated
Yeah.
from the universe.
Yep.
So if you're not aware of these issues and you haven't gone through the process that is outlined in reviewing, should this be a bar to employment? How old was this person when it happened? You know, how long ago was it? Was it a crime of violence or something kind of a misdemeanor? You're not going to be starting off the work relationship on a positive. And the other thing that really disturbs me is there have been many, many incidents where people have stolen at work and employers refuse to report it.
Sure.
And so that person is terminated for generally performance reasons. I mean, if you're someone who's stealing at work, you're probably not on time, and there's a lot of other things that are going on. And if we're not really going to report it and do an investigation into theft, then there has to be another objective reason to end the employment relationship that's defensible. But I'm always shocked by the lack of employers willing to file a police report and deal with this person and setting them free to victimize someone else.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it happens all the time. And sometimes it's small. I had an incident early on in my career where in a service provider where time and materials were stolen from the company to deliver a service, and they only found out about it when the customer was calling and saying, hey, this work that you did for me, you know, there's a problem, there's an issue, it's not living up to, you know, the quality assurances that you give on your website. And the company goes back in to look and they're like, well, you're not a customer of ours. And they say, yes, I am. Your truck was here on this day. These
Right.
were the 5 or 6 people from your company that came and did the work. Come to find out, this employee was taking cash,
Yeah.
or checks were being written out to personal names, not the business.
Yeah.
And they were stealing labor, time, and materials to deliver work product during company time. So that, you know, that was a very interesting and not necessarily, you know, something that people always want to report. They just want the problem to be over. I mean, there's many stories like that of clients that we've dealt with. And then the other, you know, the other issue you run into is when that person files for unemployment, you have no defense.
Right.
You know,
Right.
in order not to be liable for an unemployment claim, that person has to be terminated for a misdemeanor or above, according to New York State. So it's a clear violation of company policy or something unlawful being done at work.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, like that point you just made. I mean, that just an example of like, I bet you 95% of small business owners don't know that, right? And so we actually did an episode a few episodes ago with a gentleman who actually embezzled over $1 million from 2 separate companies over time. And it leads into some of the issues that you're discussing about reporting, filing a complaint. Against him, it was, but we talked about a lot of other places where, for reputational reasons, their embarrassment, whatever the reason, they just wanted to go away. So that's a really good point. So what else? What else? Like, again, for employers, and again, talking about the audience of small and mid-sized business owners that don't necessarily have the in-house capabilities to kind of put the processes in place to either, you know, prevent this from happening, detecting it when it's happening, or address it after the fact? What other sort of high level points can you talk about?
Sure. So about a year, I don't know, a year and a half ago, 24 months ago, we decided that we were going to partner with Predictive Index. We were looking for an assessment tool to understand people's behaviors and their drives and motivators better, because a lot of what we deal with is conflict at the workplace. And oftentimes, sort of the source of conflict is bad or very poor communication, people that don't understand the other person's role or responsibility and how it relates to them and how they should be working together, because there's not a clear line of sight, given by management, either an org chart or a matrix, organization of how and when am I supposed to be working with this other person, and where does my job begin and end, and where does their job begin and end, and what things should be doing jointly together. So in looking at all these situations of conflict, or what I would call minor issues of people behaving badly, but bad behavior that's disruptive, reduces productivity, reduces employee happiness at work, reduces engagement, makes people not want to come to work. It kind of comes down to knowing ourselves and being self-aware and being familiar with the personalities and the behaviors of other people around us. So we hire people because of what they know and their skills and what they bring to the table, right? Their experience, their knowledge, their certifications. And then we fire them for who they are and how they act and show up at work.
Huh. Yep.
So that is a huge step that people can take that's proactive, that allows you to put people together on teams that can be aware of, this is the best way to communicate to my colleagues. This is my preferred style. This is their preferred style. This is how we're both going to work together to meet in the middle, so that we understand each other from inception, right? We can be onboarded and develop that great working relationship from the beginning, instead of showing up and meeting a group of 25 or 50 or 100 people and having to figure out all of this intuitive, how do I react to you? How do I communicate to you? How do I ask for help from you? How do I tell you when something's going wrong? In addition to learning a new computer, new names of people, new technology, new procedures, new rules.
Right.
So we're kind of overloading people at the beginning of the work relationship, and then 100 days in, we're like, why is this person not performing well?
Right. Right.
Well, did we really do everything that we could to set them up to be successful? So I think that's the way that you can make work better from the beginning. And I think when people see that you're taking this amount of due diligence in the selection process to really get to know them and to know, is this job going to be a good fit for how you perform best? You're doing everyone a huge favor in the beginning, and you are setting people up to be successful. Nobody takes a job, at least from my perspective, and decides that I want to fail. Like, I'm here and I want to fail within the first 90 to 100 days. But oftentimes that's what we see happen.
Sure, sure. Well, I mean, really interesting points in terms of, prior to. So this is, I guess, part of the prevention, right? Is get to know them, vet them properly, give them clear expectations, provide them guidance, all those kind of things. So that's all really helpful. And then perhaps you could touch upon, all right, so now once they're on board, once they're here, as far as communicating company policy, training them, retraining them on that sort of stuff. I would imagine that's all part of the process also.
Yes, you have to. I mean, that's kind of falls under the umbrella of having like an onboarding program or a development program for new hires. or even for existing managers and supervisors. I'm sure you see this as well, Forhad, that people are promoted into management level positions because they're good at what they do and they're a good employee, but with very little training on how to detect a problem before it's a huge problem, right? What are the red flags that something is wrong?
Yeah.
How do I address those behaviors with employees? How do I give feedback in the moment that's, you know, constructive, helpful, not a personal attack? Because a lot of times frontline supervisors are the ones that know something isn't quite right, but they're not comfortable addressing it or dealing with it. And it also is very helpful for them to know, well, maybe I'm going to have this situation, but I have a place to go to right away to get help. Like I can go to my HR person. It's not a bad thing to ask for help. If I'm seeing something that doesn't look quite right to me, I should be checking in. I think that's a big part of companies setting themselves up to be successful. And being in HR for 30 something years, this seems to always be a place where there's sort of a lack of willingness to invest and take the time. And on one hand, I understand it. You know, nobody stays at an organization like for 20 or 30 years like our parents used to do, right? You got a job and you stayed there, and there was a lot of training and development, and people tend to move around. But the question that companies should be asking themselves is, if they stay and we don't train them, what have we just done?
Sure.
Versus if everybody trained their managers and supervisors, even if they left, they're going to bring something better to the next employer. So in a way, investing in the workforce in general is I don't think you can get around it and expect to have people performing at the level necessary for small businesses to be successful in this competitive climate. You can't, in the United States, just throw more people at the work, because payroll is a high expense compared to other countries. Our taxes, our benefit load, having an employee is a huge investment, and you can't compete on just sheer numbers.
Sure.
Where other countries can just say, well, maybe this person isn't so great, but we can have two people doing the job of one. In the United States, we don't have that flexibility. That's really not a viable business model.
Yep. No, absolutely. So one other area that I want to address with you is, what do you do? So there should be obviously some sort of reporting mechanism, like you mentioned, right? For someone to go and report whatever type of complaint that they might have. What do you suggest to those receiving the complaints at sort of the highest level, right? What do you suggest? Like, if you can talk just a little bit about um, what steps they should be thinking about taking. So as once it happens, now what do you do?
Right. So a lot of times, 80% of the time, employees want to have a place to go to share and talk through a concern. And oftentimes just listening with an open mind and understanding what's going on and giving them some feedback and suggestions on how to address it if it's a small issue. So, oftentimes in HR, depending on what the issue is, we'll say, look, you can just talk about it, and we'll give you some guidance on how to handle it yourself. If that doesn't work, then we can get involved in solving the problem with you, or depending on the nature of it, we may need to get someone else in management involved that can change what is happening. But I think the dialogue from employee to employer has to be a two-way street. So if you treat a complaint, or really a conversation or a concern, as a nuisance, as they're bothering you, and you kind of create this chilling effect that we're not listening, we're not going to do anything, then you're not going to find out what's going on at your workplace, and you're not going to be able to help people that maybe with a little coaching would have been fine, right? What's acceptable at one company and works in their culture doesn't always work in another company's culture. So oftentimes dealing with an employee and saying, look, the way that you did this is not really how we do things here. Let us show you the way, and please next time use this way. Most of the time, they are grateful for the feedback, because the absence of feedback and the lack of that communication, people start to make up their own rules. They don't know. And certainly giving people an employee manual and not reviewing it with them and not having conversations about what does this mean, how do I use this, it's very complex for employees to really read and understand a manual. It's a starting point. It's a reference document. It's a guide. But a lot of things need to be addressed. And so I think two-way communication is super critical. And a lot of times, again, if a frontline manager or supervisor isn't comfortable or doesn't know how to respond, and they don't have a partner that they can go to, like an HR person, they don't want to hear it, because I don't want to hear things that I don't know what to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's just such a brilliant point. I mean, yeah, like conceptually, as you talk, Christine, a lot of the stuff that you're saying makes sense, right? But until you hear it from someone like yourself, it's like, are you really thinking about all these things, right? And I think it's important for our audience to really just digest everything that you've been talking about on the show, because I think it's so important. And like, again, the way you're describing it, there are a lot of small steps also that you could take to put yourself in a better position. So I really, again, I appreciate everything that you've discussed on the show today. Typically what we do is at the end, we talk about takeaways, right? And again, just as with many of our shows, I think that the entire show is a takeaway, right? I think everything that you've discussed is a takeaway. But you mentioned one thing at the end, which I think is so important in really all walks of life, whether it's at work, at home, at wherever, right? Is that truthfully, you're better off knowing the information and having a fighting chance to deal with it and address it and fix it than not knowing. And I think that's really an important takeaway from the show, in addition to everything else that you discussed. So I toss it back to you in case you want to discuss anything further, or any high level takeaway points that you might have from our discussion today.
Well, I think all employers need good partners, right? Need good people, and especially when it comes to doing background checks. You need a partner that understands the legalities, the nuances, the different jurisdictions, the different regulations, what you can and can't ask, as well as what do you do if something comes back and there's a flag on it? Like, what does that mean? How do you get it resolved? So you've always been a tremendous partner with us in that way. So I think that's a big takeaway. Who are the people that you've lined up to support your organization in being successful and to guide you through all of this? Because it is complicated. Then I think the next takeaway is listen to your employees, develop some type of a communication channel so that people can share with you the things that are concerning or they have questions about, because knowing is everything. Once you're aware, then you can choose what to do. It's when you're unaware, and many times under different employment regulation, the employer is obligated to know. The expectation is it's your company who's running it. If it's not management, what's going on? So the law will hold you accountable for knowing, or should have known, that these types of things were going on at work. And certainly New York and a lot of states have taken the position that employers should know about harassment or bad behavior that's going on at work. So not having a formal complaint is no longer a source of protection. So set up those communication channels, different ways for people to be able to share, and even suggestions or thoughts on how do we improve, because they have a lot of great ideas. But if you don't give them permission to share, you're never going to know what those ideas are. Those are the two critical takeaways: is have good partners and have good communication channels.
I'll tell you, Christine, as I listen to you, I mean, again, I've heard you speak before. We've done things together. I am really just how knowledgeable you and your colleagues are about this stuff, and again, in an understandable way, right? I think that's what's important, is that you don't speak in like secret language or codes. This is all like easy to understand, kind of clear communication, and I think that's kind of what you're saying also, right? So I really hope people listen to this, and use Compass and Christine and her colleagues as a resource for navigating through some of these things. And we have a lot of small and mid-sized clients, and I hope that they reach out to you and talk to you about some of the issues that they're having, because I know you guys can help. So thank you all for tuning in. Please continue sending your comments to info@integrusintel.com. Please also share our podcast with anyone you think would find it interesting. In fact, reach out to us if you'd like to maybe be a guest. We'd love to have someone from our audience participate in one of these. And lastly, most importantly, take note of Christine's company information, which will be posted in the description of the podcast. So Christine, thank you so much for joining me today. Incredibly valuable. I learned something every time I speak to you, and I'm glad Mario introduced us many years ago. I'm sure we're going to be connected for many years to come, and I'm very, very happy to have you all as a resource for us and our clients.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, like I said, you've been a tremendous partner. You've helped us many times when there's been issues with the background check to get it resolved or corrected, or there's mutual love. We rely on you a lot to help our clients navigate their universe and who should be working for them. And it's a fantastic relationship. So anytime we can do something together, I'm thrilled. And, I think as business owners, we all kind of have this alliance to each other, right? To be successful and symbiotic in what we're doing. So thank you. And this has been great. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So till next time, thank you all for listening.
Don't forget to follow us. We are on LinkedIn and Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube.